Are we live? Hi, everyone. Welcome to this live event. I was caught off guard a little bit there, but welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Happy Monday to you all. Hope you're having a great start to your week, and we're going to make it that much better with today's Visual Studio Code launch party for the version 1.48. That's the July 2020 launch party. I am Brian Clark. I go by Clarkio on the internets, and I'm going to be your host for this launch party. And we are joined by the wonderful folks from the Visual Studio Code team. We're going to be doing some awesome demos and features for you. And again, this is for the July 2020 release. And it's something that the team is trying out a bit more so that they can connect virtually with the developers and awesome people out there that love to use Visual Studio Code as their tool of choice, and so showcase some of those cool features that are part of it that come out in these monthly releases. So we hope you enjoy it. We hope you get value out of it. And if you do, be sure to let the team know via Twitter, or these will be posted on YouTube as well under the Visual Studio Code YouTube account, so you can catch those later or use it as a reference later should you want to go back and review something that was shared during this session. And yeah, we have a lot of cool stuff to show and in store for today's event. We're going to have some great demos that the team is going to walk through. And on top of that, this is a great opportunity for you all to ask your questions to the team and get direct engagement with the folks that work on your favorite tool, Visual Studio Code. So, but before we get into that, I want to make sure everyone knows and is aware on how you can personally, on your own, keep up with the latest and greatest features that come out in Visual Studio Code. So one way you can do that is by going to Visual Studio, or you can go to code.visualstudio.com. And let me, share my screen so that I can demonstrate that with everybody really quick. So we're looking at code.visualstudio.com. When you go there, at the very top, there's usually this banner that lets you know, like, hey, this version, this is the latest version that's available, and you can read about those new features and fixes for that version. You click on that, and there you go. This is a great way to go about it. But I can do you one better. Directly in Visual Studio Code, if you have it installed already, at the top menu bar, there's a little help icon. You click on that and choose the release notes option. It will open up a new tab directly in Visual Studio Code for you, and you can read through these same release notes directly in Visual Studio Code. So you don't even need to leave Visual Studio Code to find out what's new within it. Okay, so now that everybody is up to date with how they can keep in tune with the latest and greatest features of Visual Studio Code, what do we have next? Well, so now we'll get into the demos basically that we mentioned earlier. And as a heads up, so you can plan accordingly, we're looking at about 40-ish minutes is what we plan to have for today's event. So if you want to carve out some time, for those of you on like the East Coast, maybe you're watching us over lunch, it should be perfectly timed out so you can tune in and catch this. If not, though, as a reminder, you can go watch the recording of this later on YouTube under the Visual Studio Code account. So without further ado, we have Sana, who's going to show us some of the new features around Git and GitHub. Sana.
Hey, Brian. So I'm going to show off some of the cool GitHub features that we've added, or source control features we've added over the last couple of releases. So I can go ahead and share my screen. All right. So the first thing I want to show, so the whole point that we want to actually do is bring GitHub or your source control closer to your editor. Right? You spend most of your time inside VS Code, editing, debugging, running your code. And there's a lot of stuff you do that's outside of the editor, such as documentation or collaboration. And so we wanted to bring that closer to your inner loop inside the editor. So the first thing we want to do and then show you is that VS Code now has automatic authentication with GitHub. So because of that, it's really easy for me to be able to push and clone repos. So for instance, right now I have a really basic Express app that I just generated, and I'm going to show you how you can publish it to GitHub. So we recently added this feature here in the source control view. So once I've authenticated with GitHub, I can go ahead and publish to GitHub. So there, you see there's an option to publish to GitHub as a private repository, or we just recently added as a public repository as well. So I can go ahead and do this and choose what I want to be published. So let's not choose my node modules, and then press OK. And then as soon as it uploads the files, does the first commit, I can go ahead and actually browse it and open it in GitHub. So really easily, uploaded the files I wanted it to, and then I can go back to VS Code, and now I have it automatically added the Git remotes as well. So this is a really easy and quick way for you to publish your applications, publish whatever you're working on to GitHub by staying in VS Code. Another thing I wanted to show you, and I'll open a new window for this, VS Code also lets you clone repositories really easily. So for instance, if I go back to the Explorer view over here, because I've authenticated with GitHub again, I can clone repository. So here I can either provide the URL from GitHub, or I can clone from GitHub, and this lets me search through all the repos that I have or that just exist on GitHub. So for instance, my boss has a really fun repository that I want to clone, and it's called the cat said node. So I'll clone this, choose where I want it, and open it.
Hey, so now just a heads up, I don't know that we're seeing the prompts, the little pop-ups that you're having in Visual Studio Code via the live share. So some of the stuff you're describing, I think we're missing the visuals of that.
Oh, okay. I think so. You'll see these pop-ups show up on the bottom right of your screen usually, and they'll just tell you to go ahead and browse to GitHub, or if you want to open in a new window. So that's what I'm referring to. Sorry about that. So we've cloned the repository super easily. Again, it pulled down and cloned over HTTPS, and I get my remote set up for me as well. But a new thing that we've added here is a command to add a remote. So if you search for add remote with the command palette, I can now really easily provide a URL, or again pick the source. So I'll pick one from, like, I want to have a version of this myself, and let's call it Sana. And it really easily set that up for me. So now I can check again, and now I have two remotes, which is awesome. And another way to do this, which is not the command palette, is from the source control view over here. So if I click on here, and if I make, let's say I'll just make a change to the README, delete that line. So now in the source control view, I can see, I can click on these three dots over here.
So now I'm really sorry to keep interrupting. Maybe you might be sharing the wrong instance of Visual Studio Code, because we're not seeing any of the stuff that you were describing.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Let me try again.
I think you're only sharing the window, not your entire screen.
Classic. Sorry, guys. All right, back here.
That's what live events are all about. We have these hiccups like this.
Okay.
Okay, there we go. Yeah.
Cool. So what I did show earlier, I'll just quickly recap. If you have an empty sort of window in VS Code, you get this option to clone a repository, and so that's what I did. It'll take a second, but you also see an option to clone from GitHub, and because you've authenticated, you can just search through all your repositories. So I did that in the previous window. So this is what I cloned, and then there was an option to add a remote. So here you can add a remote from GitHub as well, and VS Code will very easily do the git fetch and get it down for you. So now you can see I added one here called Sana, and now I can really easily push to that as well. So one thing I wanted to show was doing it from the source control view instead. The cool part is that you can see these three ellipses over here, click on it, and you get a really organized Git or source control menu. So this is something we just recently added to the editor, and this is something we actually really want feedback on. Before, there was a really long sort of list of all the Git commands, and we tried consolidating it into this. So let us know, try this out, try the source control UI out, and let us know if you prefer seeing all your Git commands in like a menu like this. So those were the main things I wanted to show. Again, it's really a good way to kind of get your things you do on GitHub and bring them into VS Code, so it's easier and faster and a tighter integration for you.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Sana. So question for you on that. It's a question from the chat. So thanks folks that are watching this live for sending in your questions. We have moderators that will pick them out and send them our way so we can get them over to the VS Code team folks here. So the question is, do these cool new clone/repo initialization features work with corporate GitHub installs? So essentially, I think they're asking about, does this incorporate working with GitHub Enterprise on that side of things?
So the GitHub pull request extension works with GitHub Enterprise till a certain version. So the most recent things that we added, including the GitHub authentication right now, does not work with GitHub Enterprise. But that is something that we are exploring and investigating, trying to add support for down the road.
Okay, great. I guess with that in mind, down the road, the future, what does the VS Code team have in store for the future of these types of integrations for Git support, source control management, and then integrating with GitHub as well? What are some of the things that you might be able to give us a little sneak peek share of what's coming?
So the main thing that I think we're doing that's kind of integrating with GitHub is GitHub code spaces. And so if you've heard of that, that is in beta right now. And it's imagine a really quick way from GitHub to be able to check out a PR, spin up a whole environment, VS Code environment for you in the browser. And so in that browser-based environment, you'll have all these things work too. So PR is checking out a different repo, the same kind of pull request functionality. So that's like the main thing that we are working on in terms of source control in GitHub.
Excellent. That sounds exciting. Well, thank you so much, Sanat, for the talking us through and demonstrating those features with Git and GitHub that are in Visual Studio Code. Next up, we have Sandeep, who's going to be talking about setting sync preview in stable. Over to you, Sandeep.
Thanks, Brian. Sharing my screen first of all. Okay. So today I want to demo what I'm showing here. So right before coming here, today morning I just closed this feature, so which is a bit old, like we just phone number issue and then a lot of thumbs up. So this is the feature which has been asked by the users for a long time. So the setting sync so that currently this feature is now available for preview on stable. I think some of you already know that this is already available in insiders, but now we make it available also in stable. Before going to the demo, I just want to quickly give the context of what setting sync is and what are the current options we have in the marketplace and why we do it in this way. So setting sync is something where you have set up your VS Code on one machine, and then you want to set up VS Code on a second machine. If you have second machine and you also have VS Code on that, and you want to sync your user preferences like settings, key bindings, extensions you have installed. So this is pretty handful and useful feature when you want to synchronize your preferences across multiple devices where you have VS Code. And there is already an extension, a couple of extensions in the marketplace which does it, like the popular setting sync extension, and also some other extensions which helps you in synchronizing this. So the reason why we wanted to have it inside the code is that most of these preferences are very much internal to VS Code, and also we want to give consistent feature set and consistent user experience when you are using the setting sync from the product. So now I will go into the demo. Yeah, so in the demo, I would be switching between multiple VS Code instances. So each VS Code instance you can think as a VS Code instance on a different machine. So this is a VS Code instance on machine 1, for example, and I have set up everything. Let's say, for example, I have these settings which I've configured, like the theme, and some other options which I'd like to have configured with VS Code. And I also have some favorite key bindings which I use in my day-to-day coding. And I also have some of the extensions which I have installed. So on top of this, I also configured the layout of my VS Code. For example, if you see on the activity bar, I have my problems view on the sidebar. So this is my layout which I use in my day-to-day coding. And now, so this is my setup. And now let's see how we would like to turn on setting sync on this machine. So we have a turn on settings option on the accounts menu, or you also have a turn on sync option on gear menu. So you can simply click on it. So this opens a configuration dialog where you can configure what you want to sync. So as I said, you can sync all this data which you configure on VS Code: settings, keyboard shortcuts, snippets, extensions, and UI state. So the keyboard shortcuts we synchronize across platforms, because the keyboard shortcuts depends upon your keyboard layout on the platform. So we synchronize them across platform. So for Windows, you get synchronized across Windows, and OS X get synchronized across OS X. And then you can simply sign in and turn on. This will provide. So currently we support two authentication providers or two accounts which you can use for signing in. So currently we have Microsoft and GitHub. You can choose one of them, and it opens the sign in option. I think the flow might go fast. Okay, now I have signed in, and then I come back here. So the setting sync is on in a second. So you can see here already that setting sync is turned on. So it means that all my user preferences are into the cloud. So now I can go to my second machine and see how I can set up VS Code on a new machine. So this will be very helpful when you have a new machine and you want to set up your VS Code. So now assume that I'm on my second machine and I have a new machine where I am setting up my VS Code. So I just start VS Code here. So this is VS Code without any setup. So now I want to synchronize my settings which are there on the cloud. So you go to the same flow. I say turn on setting sync. So since this is a preview feature, we say show a dialog that this is still under preview. And yeah, this is the same turn on flow you have seen before. And then I choose the account which I've used to sync. Yeah, and you can see on the bottom right, the sync is happening, and it syncs sync extensions, settings, and everything. Now you can see that all my extensions are synced. My theme got applied, which I was using before. So you can see the extensions got installed, and then the settings got set. And you can also observe that even we retain the comments while synchronizing, and the keyboard shortcuts are set. Yeah, so yeah, I think when it's a pretty useful feature when you're setting up a VS Code on a new machine, and you can carry all your preferences along with you. The third thing which I want to show is, let's say you have a machine which you already have some configuration set on VS Code, and how does you can enable setting sync on that machine, because you already have some configuration on that machine. So this is my third machine now. So as you can see in my third machine, you can already see that my theme is something else. So now I want to configure sync on this machine. So how the flow looks like now. Okay, I think I'll just go through this quickly. Turn on. Okay, now we are trying to sync this machine with the data on the cloud. Now, so since, as I said, you already have some data on this machine, and there is some data which you already sync from a different machine, we show this dialog whether you want to replace the data on your local machine, or you want to merge, or you want to merge manually. So I think merge manually is a newly introduced feature which we introduced last milestone, in July milestone. So this will help you in going through each of your data and then take an action accordingly. So let's say I have a settings.json. Okay, so these are my cloud settings and remote settings, and these are my local settings. I'll just probably try to replace from cloud. Maybe So the point is that you can go through each entry, and then you can take a decision whether you want to merge, or whether you want to take local or remote. So once you have gone through every entry, we enable the turn on setting sync option, and then you can turn on setting sync. Yep. Cool. So yeah, this is the third scenario, and I would probably also go quickly with the fourth scenario, where how about when there are conflicts when I'm syncing between two machines. So if there is a machine where you have conflict. Okay, yeah, sorry, I think I need to sign in here. Yeah, this is a fourth machine where you can probably have a conflict, when you're trying to change your settings on two different machines, but there are some conflicts. So this is how you can resolve your conflicts. So we show a pop-up, and then you can click on a conflict, and you can see what is local and what is the remote and what are the merges, and you can probably pick either of them. I'll pick the remote. Yeah, and then the conflict gets resolved. Cool. So these are the different flows which I want to show you today. Also I would like to show you how you can manage once the sync got turned on. So the sync UI is very slick. So we have a simple drop down where you can go through the multiple options and configure. So this is configure option where you can configure what you want to sync again. Yeah. And then the most important thing which I want to show is, okay, what if you want to see what data you have synced and what is the data that is there on the remote server or cloud. So we have a nice view to show the data on the remote. So you can browse through the data and you can see what data is there on the cloud. And if at all you want to revert back to a specific state, for example, these are the states available on the cloud. So you can always click on this restore option and this restores to that particular state. Last but not least, I think this got disabled by default. We also have a synced machines view. So as I've been at the demo, I've shown four different machines. So these are the 4 different machines which I've used for demo. And yeah, so VS Code also keeps track of all these 4 machines. And you can always edit your machine with this by giving a specific name to it. Yes, and this is about managing your sync data. And let me quickly see what I have in my demo. Yes, so the last but not least, but very important is, for example, if you want to turn on your sync and want to clear everything in the cloud, it's pretty simple. So you can just say setting sync turn off, and then we have a checkbox where you can say you want to turn off sync on all devices, which will clear the data from the cloud. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yes. So you can see that, the data got cleared. It took a while, but I think eventually it got cleared in a moment. Yes. That's all I think I have. Okay, so the last 2 things which I want to cover is whatever I've shown right now is in stable. For insiders, we also use setting sync, but the insiders use a different service, which means it has a different data store. So let me quickly show the insiders. So here is my insiders. And so insiders use a different backend data store. It means that the syncing, you cannot sync between insiders and stable, but you can always choose to switch to the stable using a command setting sync select service. So from the insiders, you can use stable endpoint to sync your data so that stable and insiders are syncing with the same backend data provider. And for the troubleshooting, we also have nice logs. So here is the log channel where we log everything what's happening on the client, and if there are any errors, etc. So whenever you have an issue, maybe you can go through this logs and probably also attach these logs when you have an issue and want to file an issue in GitHub in our VS Code repo. I think that's all I have. Maybe if there are any questions.
Yes. So wow. Whoa, Sandeep, that was a lot to take in, my friend. So well done. Thank you for that. A very interesting demo. I was not aware as an avid user of the settings sync, I was not aware of that, like being able to manage your settings sync view that you were showing before and these logs like that. So thank you for pointing that out. We do have quite a bit of questions on this, but I'm just going to ask 2 for now from the viewers for the sake of time. And then if we have time at the end, we'll get to some of the rest. So the first question for you, Sandeep, is would settings sync work with corporate Office 365 accounts by chance?
I think it shall work, but I'm not sure.
Okay, we'll hold on that one then. The next question is about, where do we go? There we go. A settings sync, the user in particular has found that user tasks are not capable of being synced between machines. Is there any potential plans to add that as an option to sync?
Yeah, I think we want to enable user tasks. So this is, as I said, so yeah, these are the current feature set, and we're gonna add user tasks very soon.
Okay, great. All right, so let's move on to the next demo that we have, and this is coming from Connor, who's going to do a demo on the open link capabilities, debugging by open link debug via the new and improved JavaScript debugger in Visual Studio Code. So Connor, right on over to you.
Yeah, so something that I've been pushing for is making like most debugging happen without any configuration. So like from the past, something that you just have said is that just setting up debugging is really hard. So last month, I'll go ahead and share my screen right here. You might have noticed the debug terminal, which lets you debug like Node apps without any configuration. So if you open the debug terminal, then you can type Node, then you can just enter debugger and you hit the debugger statement. So like this was working great for Node, but there wasn't really anything similar for browsers. So for that, this month we've added a new command called a debug open link. And there's also a different open link command, which is not what you want. You want to use the debug version of it. And so, for example, here I just have a simple like create React app set up. As you see, I don't have any launch configuration. I just have some settings, but no configuration there. But now using this command, I could set a breakpoint here, for example, and then hit the debug open link command. I'm going to localhost 3000, and then when I do that, it opens my browser. I can hit the button, and then I hit the breakpoint, and I don't have to do any configuration or any setup to do this. Also, like one kind of small convenience feature is that if you have a selected URL in here, then running that command will just open that immediately without having to copy and paste into there. And yeah, so I hope this should make debugging a lot easier for doing browsers, and for most people, you probably don't need to do any more setup aside from this. So yeah, that's actually about it. Much faster than Sandeep's demo, but.
Well, fantastic. Thank you for that, Connor. So some questions for you on that. So how does it know, or I mean, I guess, how do we determine the URL to use? Can I just put in any localhost URL import and that will work, or is it specific? Is it something that, does it have to be localhost 3000, I guess is my question.
No, so like, for example, I could go and debug, like GitHub.com or something, and like that would also work. Oops. Oh, I think I have Chrome still running. Oh yeah. I can go and debug GitHub.com, and that'll also work. I don't like my source isn't running on here, so I can't set any breakpoints. But if I like trigger some JavaScript code, then it'll say it's trying to break in there. Normally, if you're using, for example, like create React app, it'll actually print the location where it's running inside of your terminal. So yeah, for example, like create React app says, for some reason it's kind of truncated right there, but yeah, says it's like running on like some URL, so you can copy that. And actually, if it's copied in your clipboard, then it'll be pre-filled inside of that little box for you already. And so then you can copy that, you can just hit enter, and then once again, I didn't close this. It'll be pre-filled, and then you can just hit that, and then start debugging.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for that. It's really great to see these improvements in the JavaScript debugger.
Yeah,
another question for you, though, that I think you can answer without having to show your screen. What's the tool that you're using that was showing the letters that you were typing? Is there a specific mode or something that you enable in Visual Studio Code for that?
Oh yeah, so it's actually called the screencast node. So there's actually a command called toggle screencast node, and when this is on, then all your key presses will be shown up here, which is great if you're streaming or if you're doing a demo and people like might not know like exactly what you're doing. It helps people follow along.
Cool, excellent. Thank you for sharing that. All right. Well, thanks again, Connor. Next up, we have Bridget, who's going to talk to us about remote containers and some of the awesomeness there. So over to you, Bridget.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, excited to be here. Excited to talk about remote containers, one of my favorite features in Visual Studio Code. So even though remote containers aren't new this iteration, we still wanted to highlight it because we've done some new work with documentation, and just in case folks weren't aware of it, we wanted to do a demo of the extension. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and show folks what we can do in Visual Studio Code today. So I'll share my screen here. So just as a diagram, in case folks aren't aware of dev containers, so essentially a container is a piece of software that packages up your application and any of the dependencies that your app needs to run. So for instance, as we're seeing here, if we had a Python container, let's say, it would include your Python app and any of like the runtimes or dependencies that your Python app needs to run. So if we go over to VS Code, I have a Python app already here, but if I didn't want to worry about having Python installed on my machine or anything, I could go ahead and use remote containers in VS Code to have a pre-configured Python environment set up for me already. So if I go ahead and look at the extensions, I can see remote containers, and we actually have a few remote extensions. So we have remote WSL for developing within the Windows subsystem for Linux, and we also have remote SSH, but today we're going to look at remote containers. So I already have it installed here, which is awesome. And whenever we have one of the remote extensions installed, it adds this green remote indicator, which we can click on to see the remote commands. And so we have a few options here. Specifically, I'm going to take a look at adding development container configuration files. So if I can click on this one here, the command is actually pretty intelligent, and it detects what kind of files are already in our application or in the folder that we have open. So as we saw, I'm in a Python app, or I have a Python file open. So it's going to automatically suggest that, hey, I think you want to configure a Python development environment. So let's say that I want to use a Python 3 dev container. So I'm going to specifically say, hey, I want to develop in a Python environment. So I'm going to select Python 3 here. And then I went ahead and added that. So if I go back to the Explorer view, okay, cool. So before we just had this hello python.py file, but now we can see that we actually have this .dev container folder. And we can see that it has a dev container.json and has a Docker file. So if we take a look, so the Docker file is going to include some information about like what should be in the container. And so, for instance, it'll include like the image from maybe like a container registry. And then the dev container.json is going to include like how VS Code is going to connect to your container, or some things that VS Code is going to set up for you. So for instance, some settings, so maybe like some pathing information for setting up Python, and even some extensions that could automatically be set up. So if I go ahead and look at my extensions view again, let me remove that there. Actually, when I reconnect to my container, we'll be able to see the beauty here. But you may have seen it, but it was actually kind of quick. There was a recommendation here when I set this up to reopen in my dev container. But now I can go ahead and with containers, I can reopen container now that we have a container option here. So now VS Code is going to reload, and we can see now that we're starting with our dev container. We can see that the green remote indicator over here is opening our remote environment. So now we're no longer going to be like in our local environment. It's going to instead shift over to our Python development environment. All right, and we can see we still have the same files over here. So we still have our Python file and we still have our .dev container. But now the green remote indicator is showing that we're connected to our dev container, and it's specifically a Python 3 dev container. So if we open this up here, we can see that I've appropriately named it Hello VS Code Release Party. So let's go ahead and see what happens. So we don't really need to worry about what we have installed on our local machine, if we have Python 3 installed or not. Do we have any Python version? So let's go try running it. And cool, we can see that we have some output, Hello VS Code Release Party. We didn't even need to worry about configuring anything on our local machine. And we also have some other flows that are really cool with dev containers. So for instance, if you have a GitHub repo set up that maybe has some sample code and has a .dev container folder already set up, you can actually go ahead and grab it from GitHub and open it up in VS Code. So for instance, if I go here and I look at remote containers, and I can say open repository in container, we have some sample repos set up, but you can also grab your own repo. So for instance, I have a sample repo set up already, so I'll grab that one and just paste that in. And then we're prompted to either create a unique volume or a new volume. And now volume is just a mechanism for like storing files in our container essentially. So either option is totally fine. I'll just select create a unique volume. And then it'll go ahead and essentially set up our container again. We can see that again, we're starting with a dev container, and it's going to go ahead and open up the remote environment. And once that completes, it's going to go ahead and pull those files from GitHub actually for us. And again, it doesn't matter what we have set up on our local machine. We're able to keep our local machine free and clear of any downloads or dependencies and just go ahead and work within VS Code. We're able to have the full support of VS Code, so you can see we can set breakpoints, we can do debugging, we have IntelliSense, we can use extensions. So if I go over to extensions, you can actually see that we have locally installed extensions, and then we have specific extensions that are installed within our dev container. And yeah, so, and then a couple of the new things that we highlighted or created for this iteration, because a couple of the really cool applications for dev containers specifically as well. They're really great, obviously, for professional development environments, like in the workplace, where everyone on a same team can get the same development environment very easily without having to configure certain downloads on their machine. But they're also really interesting in the education application as well. So for this iteration, we also came up with some documentation. If I can get rid of that bar, that would be great. But we came up with some documentation and a video as well to show how students and educators alike can use this in the education space. So there's a couple of really interesting applications in that space as well for dev containers. Yeah, but that is the rundown for dev containers in Visual Studio Code.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bridget, for that demo. So questions for Bridget, folks, let us know in the chat room. In the meantime, while we're waiting on some of those, I have a question for you, Bridget. I'm new to containers. What is some of the benefits of developing within a container? What are some use cases that you can describe that that are advantages of going about our development in this way?
Yeah, for sure. I would say one of the major ones is being able to preserve your local machine's setup. So one of the major ones, like why I showcase Python as an example, is Python is notorious for having different like major and minor versions, for instance. And so when you get into a scenario where it can get a little bit tricky if you're in a use case where only Python 3 is going to work for this application, but then you have Python 2.7 on your machine. You don't really want to get into a situation where you have to like go uninstall an old version of Python, or then you have different versions of Python on your computer. It can get a little bit time consuming or confusing. And so it's really nice to be able to just preserve your local machine and just quickly set up a unique isolated environment for each unique development scenario that you have, depending on the app that you're developing or depending on like that specific workspace.
Nice. I think you put it gently there, that it's a little tricky at times. I've definitely run into some hurdles with that myself there. We have another question from folks, the viewers. They asked about basically the question is, do I need to have Docker or a container service on my local machine? In this particular, I guess they're working on Windows, in order to be able to use the container, this functionality with Visual Studio Code?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, you need to have Docker installed on your local machine, but that is the only prerequisite installation. So just installing Docker, and then you'll be good to go.
Awesome. The other question I have actually kind of goes hand in hand with what Sandeep was showing with the settings sync. Is it possible, or would there be any real need maybe to sync settings between like a container and other, like would that count as like a new machine that I could potentially sync my settings with so they get the same look and feel when I'm developing within a container versus on another machine?
So most of the settings get synced, on the from machine to machine, but for the containers, the container settings are separated from the local settings. So the container settings are not yet planned for sync, but there is a feature request where we want to support synchronizing user data from the remote containers, or from the remote SSH machines, or even remote WSL.
Nice. You mentioned, so maybe Bridget, you can help answer this. We focused on containers, but what about Windows subsystem for Linux 2, WSL2? Is that another remote development possibility with Visual Studio Code?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, if I go over to, if I look over here, yeah, we have both remote WSL and remote SSH. So especially as everyone's like more distributed and developing remotely and at home right now, we think that remote WSL containers and SSH are great opportunities to kind of change the way that folks are developing. And we've heard that they're really helpful tools. So we'd love to hear what folks think for how they can change and improve your productivity there.
Awesome. Another question from the viewers. Any plans to support multi-container dev environments such as Docker Compose?
Yeah, so we do currently support Docker Compose. If I can show the VS Code docs, we can learn more about it if we go to our docs here. So if you go to VS Code docs, and then go to remote, and then containers, we have all about it in the containers information here. So please feel free to check it out there, and then let us know if you have any questions.
Sweet, thank you. All right, so I think with that, we'll wrap up all the demos for today. We have a couple more questions that I know were around setting sync that I want to jump back to. So Sandeep, if you're still there, if you got a few more minutes. Well, one question I had was, I know Codespaces is starting to, evolve and become more available. And so the question is around, hey, does setting sync work within Codespaces as well? Or, well, I guess first of all, what is Codespaces? And then can setting sync work within that space?
Yeah. So yeah, basically Codespace is something which you can open a GitHub repo from the browser. So this is called Codespace, and yeah, so you can see currently I'm opening a Codespace. Yeah, there are some network issues. Let me quickly open it. Yeah, I don't want to take up time while it is being loaded, but to your question, this is about the Codespace, and the setting sync is also supported on Codespace. Right now, you need to enable you need to turn on manually, but in future we are trying to sync automatically when you open a Codespace, because we have all your because when you log into GitHub, we can use that to synchronize your settings.
Excellent. Thank you, Sandeep. So we're going to take two more quick questions, or more general questions. Hopefully there might be somebody on the call from the VS Code team that might be able to help. If not, we can maybe get to them via comments on the YouTube video or address them in the next launch party. The one question is there a way to see only methods drop down, from a JavaScript or a TSX, React TypeScript JSX file? I'm not sure I quite fully understand the question, but maybe is there anyone on the call that might be able to help answer that?
Yeah, I'm not
Okay.
sure. Maybe that's a good one to ask on our GitHub repo.
Okay, great. Sana, a question for you actually. Is there an option to force push commits to a Git remote repository?
I'm not sure, but that's something we can search up and respond to you in the comments. I think so. I think there might be a way to do that.
Okay, cool. All right, I think we're going to have to wrap up on time for this one. So if we didn't get to your question, apologize for that, but feel free to reach out in the next live event or open up an issue on GitHub and reach out to the team that way. Thank you all on the VS Code team for the great demos today. That was fantastic, very insightful, and I think it would bring a lot of value to the developers in the community. So that does it, folks, for the July 2020 launch party. That's version 1.48 of Visual Studio Code. Keep an eye out for the recording again on YouTube. That's the Visual Studio Code channel on YouTube. If you search for Visual Studio Code there, you should be able to find it. And that way you can reference it and check it out. Thanks again. Hope you have a good rest of your Monday and week. Bye.